need to learn like the dialect of Spanish?
Well, it's the way they pronounce like um so this when I learned this recently, this changed a lot for me that in English our words, our letters are very hard. So like the word or the letter O is O. And in Spanish, in Espanol, it's O. So like the word todo. So todo, Todo. To say that in English, it's todo, like it's hard. But in
Mhm.
Espanol, it's todo. It's like todo, like you almost use
Oh,
the back of
oh,
your
oh.
tongue behind your teeth to make these
Yeah, yeah,
soft.
yeah. Yeah, so
It's
it's more like forward in your it's more like forward in your mouth, whereas we're more like we're like back. We're like
Yeah,
back
and the
here.
letters are hard. Like I was speaking to my
Yeah.
landlady, doing my best with my phone and trying to talk to her because of course, she's knowing any English. And I said to her, English is fuerte, so strong. And then I said, Español is muy bonito because it's just so gentle and delicate and it's beautiful. And English is so hard.
It
And she
is
has
hard.
family in Montreal, so she understands. But yeah, it's just that's the part when I learned how instead of just, okay, here's the word, learn the word, you're done with the word. You need to learn why the Spanish chose that word, how they chose to say it, how it comes out of their mouth, where they put their tongue. So it's not just a word, because if you pronounce it wrong, they have no idea what you're saying. I asked for an orange juice one day, this was like months ago, and it's spelled jugo de naranja, is how it's spelled.
Mm.
Well, their
Yeah.
J's are H's and they're soft. So I said, Jugo de Naranja. And she looks at me and I had to point. She goes, Oh, Ugo de Naranja. Like, oh, yes. And even though I pronounced the J, she didn't have a clue what I was saying because the J's are H sounds. And then the H's are often silent. Like it's not hola, it's hola. Yeah. So once you get your ABCs right and get the pronunciation right, then it's not so hard.
It's better, yeah. And then you have to kind of like I was just thinking about how it's so like systems thinking can really help with that too, because it's all about like patterns and context and things like that. So it's like you can't understand something outside of the context in which it's like outside of its context. So we can't like so it's like what you were saying with like the words like you have to it's not just about going like orange equals this juice
Yeah.
equals this and then just making that so you can't just translate from like English to Spanish you have to understand like the whole means of expression and like the purpose behind it and the context and like it's there's not like a direct one-to-one translation. So it's kind of like then it makes me think of like with dogs too. It's like I think we're trying to often make like this like one-to-one translation. Like, what does this body language mean?
You stop
Uh
and you stop and it's like, okay, ears are pinned. What's that mean? What's that mean, everybody? And then we move on, right? But there's so much more. There's so much more. Absolutely.
yeah, it's like if there's the context is so important and the context is not just like it's not just like the context of that moment. It's not just like, okay, like what other supporting signals are there? Like if the dog's ears are back, it's like
Mm,
what other supporting signals are there? Like, oh, the eyes are also like kind of like wall eye, or like the muscles are tense, or there's dandruff. Like that might tell us like, okay, maybe this dog is like going into like flight or what we would call like a fearful expression. So we do need to look at like that immediate like context and picture, but then we also have to like look at it in like the broader picture of that dog's dialect and communication. Like what like what breed is the dog? Like what's their language? Like do they speak English or Spanish? Like are they
Yeah.
from Canada or Central America? Are they from Panama? Or are they
Mhm.
from like Mexico or Costa Rica? Like
Yeah.
what's the immediate context for it, but then also like what's the bigger context for it? And then what's the context of that behavior, like in the context of all of the other dogs' behaviors as well? Because maybe it's like a new rescue, like maybe like some of the rescues that you have fostered in the past, where you've just gotten this rescue dog, you're bringing it into this entirely new context. And so like generally it's quite fearful, right? Because you're introducing it from its context. Maybe it was running around on one of the reses or something like that, right? So you're bringing it now into like the home context and into the context of like your environment, your dogs, and stuff like that. So in general, that communication is quite common for where the dog is at right now. However, if this is a dog that's like more typically quite confident and relaxed and not fearful, then it's almost like more meaningful in a way, because it's like, holy smokes, like, why is this dog like suddenly so fearful? Like, why this signal? Why are the ears back? Like, what's going on? Is there something going on? Like, is there like an ear infection? Is the dog in pain? Is the dog like, is there something going on in the environment or in the dog's world that's like much different than the day to day? So I think like context is like such an important variable for us to consider, whether we're learning a new language, and we're trying to communicate, can I get an orange juice, please? Or if we're trying to like understand a dog and their communication.
And c- communication breakdown is something that's, I don't know, if you have a brain and you can communicate, whether it's words or ear twitches or whatever, I feel like communication breakdown between our friends, our family, our dogs, our cats, our bird, like anything, communication breakdown is like that number one factor to like all the stuff that goes wrong. So like me, I'm trying to learn a new language, and like you said, I can't just learn the word for orange juice. I need to learn how to say orange juice and where does it fit into the sentence, because it's not going to be the same as in English, where maybe my husband and I are having a conversation about something, and the way that I say something comes across differently than how he would have said it, and now communication breakdown. So I feel like it's the same with our dogs, where we don't read them, we may be reading them a little too scripted. I think it's important that we all learn body language, stress signs, all the basic 101 stuff. Whenever anyone asks me to do a quick seminar or a quick PowerPoint or something for a group, my go-to number one is to do a body language presentation. Number one, because I need everybody to know that yawns don't always mean they're sleepy, just those basic things. But at the same time, knowing that, yeah, a yawn may indicate stress, it may indicate being uncomfortable, it may indicate being sleepy, but who's the dog in front of you? Like how many other onions can we peel here? So I feel like comparing, myself learning a new language is really no different than myself bringing in a new dog. I'm learning their language now too. So learning Spanish has been interesting, because I'm very much an Alberta, Canada girl. I speak, Canadian. So getting the accents right, getting the body language right, speaking to other Panamanians, I change my body language. I try to be softer, because their language is so more emotional and it's softer. Just like some dogs, you really need to be a little bit softer. Even my two, like Jackson's bomb proof, he can handle pretty much whatever. Barrett, not so much. So if my voice isn't quite right for him, he'll panic. He might not walk from the rug to the door that day if my voice is not at a pitch that's comfortable for him. And it's the same if, I go to a restaurant here in Panama and I order something and I get the accent wrong. They look at me like, what's her problem? She's not very happy today, even though I am, but I have the language wrong. So I've learned a lot about that with my own journey learning a language and putting who and what is a dog into that.
It's really, yeah, it's like there's some great like parallels there. And what you said about so many, problems, whether it's our own interpersonal problems with, if it's just a person at a grocery store, or in our relationships or with our significant others, or with our dogs, can really be attributed back to communication problems. And then I was also thinking, as you were talking, is sort of how there's also the context of the relationship. So in other words, with Lewis, there's a different context to that relationship. So the communication also then takes on a different form within the context of that relationship as well than it does when you go to like the fruit stand and you're ordering vegetables or like juice. And so in some ways, like maybe if you're trying to speak Spanish with Lewis, because you guys are just working on developing your Spanish within just your own home, even then there could be like more room for error too in some way. Like it could be like maybe you're speaking a little bit like, to use your word, kind of like more harder or more like abruptly, kind of more, you're bringing your more like Albertan English Canadian kind of flair into it. And then that's totally fine. Like that doesn't cause like a communication breakdown or relationship breakdown. It doesn't cause like behavioral meltdowns to happen. Whereas the wrong communication, the not paying attention to being softer and to your body language and to how you're emoting in your communication in an interaction with somebody at like a fruit stand or some other person that you're interacting with, like in your community or neighborhood or something like that, could completely shut down the relationship. It could cause misunderstanding. It could cause them to be off-put by it. It could make you really frustrated if maybe like you're asking for an orange juice. They don't understand like what it is that you are asking for. And then now you're frustrated because you're really thirsty and you want an orange juice. And so then or maybe you become really embarrassed because maybe you've accidentally said something you totally didn't mean to say. And so now there's like this level of like social embarrassment and stuff like that. So I'm thinking kind of like specifically with like the core elements, I'm thinking of issues with like connect, because that's all about communication. So I'm thinking, you could have like these connect issues that kind of come up in your communication with people in your community. But then I'm thinking of how different that is if it's in the context of your relationship. But then I'm also thinking of that could even change day to day within your relationship, because maybe like you've had some sort of disagreement with Lewis the day before about something completely different. It has nothing to do with Spanish and speaking Spanish. And now it's like a day later and you're speaking in Spanish and you are not being as soft as you should be. And now suddenly that's like fired up this kind of issue from yesterday that had literally nothing to do with Spanish or even what you're talking about. And I think that is something that happens all the time with our dogs too. And we would just say that that meltdown in that moment, that whatever happened when you and Lewis got into some sort of an argument or there was some sort of confrontation, if you were the dog and Lewis was the client, Lewis would be saying, you know, Sheila's got a blank blank issue. She's aggressive, or she's reactive, or she's not listening to me, or she's hyper, or she's whatever it is, misbehaving. She's got a problem. We'd be looking for a class for this problem, but then it's like that's not even the problem. So that's kind of what I was thinking of.
Well, yeah, communicate, or the whole disconnect, the communication breakdown, because like, you know, you only have to be a human for maybe 10 years to know what it feels like to have someone not understand you. 10 years, 5 years. You could easily be a 5-year-old and be upset because nobody understands you. And then as soon as that happens, then the wheels fall off. And our poor dogs, we don't have a clue what they're saying most of the time. We get so impatient with them. And, you know, I'll use Barrett again as my example, you know, with the connect element, where he's sensitive to flooring. There was a time a couple of weeks ago where I had some extra pain in my hands. My hands are a mess, blah, blah, blah. I was a little crabby. I was getting impatient with him because he wouldn't walk this little tiny spot on the floor of tile. I had to put this rug down and, okay, Barrett, let's go outside. And I was just getting impatient because it hurt. It physically hurt my hands to pick up this thing. And I was just like, come on, buddy, let's just go out the door. I didn't pick up on this until several days later when my hands were starting to feel a little bit better and he started to respond better, is that he was absolutely just watching me overreact to him. He felt every single thing I was feeling, and he was watching me to just be in pain and literally taking it out on him, even though it wasn't my intention. I wasn't, you know, I wasn't beating him. I wasn't yelling at him. I wasn't forcing him to do anything. I was just impatient because my hands hurt, and it totally shut him down. So understanding how sensitive even my own dog, who trusts me, is to us. So when we talk about connect and the lead element, you know, and the think element, all of those are, you know, such a big deal, especially when we're talking about reactivity and emotion. Trying to be that happy medium leader, ensure our connections there, always going through what we think is going on. It gets foggy sometimes, and we're human beings, so we go through things that our dogs will never understand either. So I think that's just something, you know, to kind of be aware of when you're dealing with your dog who might be struggling. I'm not saying, you know, it's all your fault, step back, it's all your fault. I'm not saying that, but it's just something to be really aware of, that, you know, how between the lead, the think, and the connect elements, what exactly are we projecting onto our dogs in terms of that feeling of safety and security? Because even though Barrett and I are, you know, we're close, he trusts me, I love him, those couple weeks where I was in pain, like I kind of lost him there for a bit. He didn't really want to trust me that much because I was very impatient with him. So being sure to kind of keep that in the back of your mind, I think, being aware of what's actually going on under the surface with your communication.
Yeah, I think that's key too, because like what you said is sort of like, yeah, life is challenging. We, you know, pulled in a lot of different directions as people and as dog guardians. And yeah, there's sometimes these rough moments where we're not intending to create this type of reaction in our dog, or to cause them reason for concern. But sometimes that just happens because they are very sensitive. One thing that I just sort of at the tip of the iceberg in terms of looking into it. I don't have ton of details yet, but a comparison of the human brain versus the dog brain, just in terms of the number of neurons. So the human brain has something like adult human, 87 billion neurons. The dog brain has something like 500 million neurons. So we're significantly smaller. And so where are those extra neurons? Now, I don't have all of the answers. Anybody that's kind of watching this that knows me is I'll find a new rabbit hole, and then I'll get interested, and then I'll sort of go down the rabbit hole, and then I'll pop up in like a year with like a lot of new information and insight. That's right. But I'll be gone for a bit. So right now where my rabbit holes are taking me is into brain science and emotions and kind of the intersection of those things. But I'm just sort of like I'm just about to fall down a solid rabbit hole here. So so I don't have what's that? See you later. Yeah, if you don't see me for a bit, yeah, I'll pop back up. I'll say hello from time to time. So without, I don't have too much information, and I definitely don't want to put out misinformation, but just learning that, okay, dog, 500 million, human, 87 billion. So what and where in the brain is that difference? I mean, if I had to guess, I would say that the difference, the 86.5 billion neuron difference is the prefrontal cortex and the front brain. Now, of course, the brain works like a symphony, so it's not like, I think sometimes you can think of it kind of like very reductionist, like, you're either using like your reptilian brain or your mammalian brain, or like your prefrontal cortex and your sort of more human brain, but it's not that simple either. They're all interconnected. But what I'm thinking though is that for our dogs, that the more primitive and mammalian brains are more developed. And then where those additional, 86.5 billion neurons are probably more connected to like the front brain, which is higher executive function, language, and things like metacognition, cognition, all of those things. And so where my brain goes next is to look at where is an infant's brain, like how many neurons does a newborn have? How many neurons does a 2-year-old have? How many neurons does a 10-year-old child have? Because that would just form some sort of like relatable basis for what is sort of the rough experience of a dog. But I think it's more emotional and sensory oriented. And so then I think, to kind of circle back to what you were describing, Sheila, with, being in pain and going through something that's really difficult, and then sort of getting, your focus is there. And then only a week later saying, oh my goodness, like, look at the effect that this has had on my dog, who's very sensitive. And I think that's very real for both of you. It's very real for you, but it's also very real for Barrett. And I would expect that his experience of that is one of being like, why is my mom being so impatient? Like, what's wrong? But more in just that visceral emotional level versus, he's not like, hey, my mom's in pain because she's got, XYZ is going on with her health, and she's probably just having a hard time. And so I need to maybe just like demand a little bit less, or I need to kind of get myself together so that, I'm not sort of a burden to my mom while she's going through this hard time. Like, that's just not there. It's just like, I'm scared and I need help to go outside. And why is my mom behaving in such a bizarre way? And then it's like, is there something wrong with, like, is there like a threat to my survival, like my social survival, my physical survival, the survival of my social unit? Am I going to be losing my house soon? Like, I'm just imagining kind of like just that visceral response of our animals. And I think that that's something that we can only see that in like the rear view mirror. Like, it's like you said, a week later, you're like, holy smokes. And that's okay. Like, it's okay that there was a week in there that you were sort of like oblivious, for lack of better terms, to this, because you were sort of caught up in, I'm in pain. I don't really have the patience for these kind of things, and it's totally fine. It's like, okay. But then it's like a week later, you can say, I'm sorry, Barrett. Like, I don't know how you kind of bridge those two
Well,
things back together, but it's just having an awareness of that. And then being able to then somehow communicate to our dog, it's okay.
mhm. And because the feeling of safety and security is so important, the relationship, connect, lead, think, it's all relationship. I really focused on that part. So what I did to bridge that is he would get to the edge of the carpet and he'd look out the door, and I would just stand there and say, Barrett, do you want to go outside? And if he did a look away, I'd say, okay, let's get your mat. And I've always said those words, let's get your mat. And I keep it behind the door. So I just plop his mat on the floor, and then he walks out the door. Because sometimes he'll get to the edge of carpet and I'll say, do you want to go outside? And he'll be like, yeah, I can do this. And he'll stroll out the door. So I just have to be very cognizant of how, when I'm standing at the door, am I standing here like this? Or am I like this? Do I say, do you want to go outside? Or am I saying, can we go outside? Like, where's my tone of voice? Again, communication breakdown. And then something else I noticed in this few week span is that at nighttime, we all sleep in our room, and I close the door. We have air conditioning because it's hot here. So I always call the boys. I'm like, going to bed, let's go to bed. And Jackson runs to bed. Barrett wasn't coming, which was weird. So I would encourage him for several minutes with hot dogs and let's go to bed, because I was getting impatient and I wanted to go to bed and close the door and turn the air on. I was tired. So finally one night I'm like, I know better. I'm being impatient again because I'm hot. Okay, Barrett, you know what? You hang out here. When you're ready, you know how to get to our room. So I just left the door open. I went to bed. Sure enough, 10, 15 minutes, I hear click, 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 nails on the tile, jumps into bed by himself. So from that day forward, which was quite a few weeks ago, I now say, do you guys want to go to bed, in my, peaceful, happy tone? And sometimes Barrett beats me there. Sometimes he doesn't come in until midnight, just whenever he's ready. And it has changed so much for that feeling of like he has some kind of control over his life, right? He's like, I can do this when I'm ready. I don't have to do what she says all the time. It's okay. I don't have to go to bed. Nobody's going to die. Just giving him a little control over his own life changed a lot. So big notices, big things to notice.
For sure, yeah. And then even just like like you said, what is your body doing? Like, are you tense? How is your voice coming across? Because dogs are masters in, I know there's been research on this, they know the difference between, come on, Barrett, come into the bedroom, like I'll give you cookies, but like get your butt in here, buddy. Versus, but I'm really happy. Versus like the genuineness in our affect. And for some dogs too. So again, nothing is a blanket statement, because some dogs have they're less sensitive to that. They're just more like, oh, okay, cool, cookies, amazing, right? So some just aren't as emotionally sensitive. And so they're going to be less affected by sort of the ebbs and flows of our emotions and our affect in the way that we're communicating and speaking. But for a lot of dogs, like with Barrett, it's completely different story. So you can't really lie to them about what your intentions, motivations, emotions are. They are just reading between the lines, and they will pick up that underlying conversation, and that conversation will create conflict. And what I've seen in my career is, in some cases that I've worked, that could then actually emerge in even some sort of aggression or conflict over the food, right? Like you pull out a treat to get your dog into the bedroom or into the crate, and the dog's like, I don't think so. You can't, you can't manipulate me with this treat and tell me that this is a good thing. This is not the conversation. I see you and I get what you're really about, and I don't trust you. So for some dogs, that distinction is going to cause this spillover effect that is going to be absolutely kind of devastating in the relationship, because now once your dog doesn't trust you, and this is something, of course, that I navigated with Mouse, once they don't trust you, it's no longer just about the treat and going to bed at night and getting the treat and go to your bed. Now it's about, I don't trust you. And once I don't trust you, it's no different than our own relationships. If I don't trust you, I don't trust you. And so now this permeates every facet and aspect of our life. It's like, I don't trust you outside to protect me. So therefore, I'm going to take matters into my own hands when somebody or a dog approaches us on a walk. I don't trust you with food. Therefore, when I find that bone on a walk and you come up to me with the treat to get me to drop it, I'm going to resource guard against you. Or I don't trust you. So now when you come to sit next to me on the couch, I'm going to growl at you. Or I don't trust you. I'm not going to listen to you anymore. So when you call me to come, I don't care. I'm not coming. I don't care if you've got steak, man. Like, I'm not coming. And so this is where this communication breakdown, paired with our dog's sensitivities, and it can cause just this snowball effect of issues, which then of course causes more behavioral issues, which if we're not sort of, let's just say, getting real and starting to have these kind of conversations and starting to just have a level of awareness that this is what's going on, well, what we're going to end up with is a dog that just has all of these behavior problems. He's reactive. He's got resource guarding. He doesn't listen. He doesn't settle down. He's like a nightmare. We're going to be seeking help for all of these behavior problems. And we're never really going to get the answers that we need until we just start to kind of see that there's this whole other thing that's going on that started with communication breakdown and is now snowballed into trust issues, general relationship problems. I don't feel safe. I don't feel secure, and all of those sort of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, huge communication breakdown. Like I said at the beginning, that's just those two words are always in my head about just navigating my life with my friends, my husband, my family, my dogs, am I communicating what I'm actually intending here? And am I actually listening with the intent to reply or to actually hear them? Like what kind of communication have I chosen with the person or animal in front of me? Because especially, I don't know, just I'm going to say society these days and be a weirdo about it, but just people listen with the intent to reply. They hear things, they form an opinion, they kind of block out the rest, and then they're boom and they're instant reply and retort, and this is my opinion on this. But then it brings us to perspectives, right? Are you open to possibly another perspective on this conversation? And with our dogs, like you said, Barrett doesn't know that I was just hurting that day. He doesn't know I was impatient. That had nothing to do with him. He didn't know that. So when it comes to dogs, the onus is on us. We have to be aware of all these things for them. Because when the wheels fall off, and now we're complaining that our dogs are doing all these awful things, we have to look back in the mirror a little bit, and we have to investigate a bit and see, okay, well, where do we fall into this picture? And making careful observation of how important it is to, when we're working through complex behavior, to step away from this operant conditioning regime, this pattern of click and treat. Click and treat's great. It's perfect for a bajillion situations. When we're trying to unravel some complex behavior, bringing out that hot dog might not help you. It might hinder you because you don't know what your dog's actually trying to tell you in the moment, or what you've just projected onto him. So yeah, I might be babbling a bit, but the relationship, it's just such a big deal when we look at reactivity. And reactivity and aggression is something I've been hyper focused on for years. And when we did our course, it was just like right up my alley to really dig into that, because I've lived it, and I'm going through it all the time with clients every day. And it's just something, as you go deeper and deeper as the days go on, these onion layers keep showing themselves, and I just keep learning, like, wow, I didn't notice that last time, and wow, this is crazy, can't believe this just happened. So always learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And like taking perspective and listening is so it's so important. And I think for when it comes to with our dogs, because we do have differences in terms of our brain size and our processing, and we have different roles in the relationship and all of that, our responsibility in that is inherently in the domesticated context a little bit more. And how do we listen is we listen with our eyes through observation. We can certainly listen with our ears. And then I think it's kind of like what you said, Sheila, is that we listen by being open to a different perspective. That doesn't mean that we have to put aside our own perspective either. So it's not healthy to have a relationship with a dog that's just based on meeting their needs and their perspective. That's not what it's about at all. But all it's about is just putting aside our own perspective for a moment and being aware of what our perspective is, and then listening with our eyes and with our ears, and just by being open to whatever it is that our dogs are trying to say. And then from there, we can kind of like zoom back out and, maybe zoom back in on our perspective, zoom back in and look at their perspective, and then try to figure out kind of is there like a way to kind of bridge those perspectives? Am I going to give or take in this particular situation? Like, if it's a matter of safety, like if the dog's perspective, just as an example, is that it should be able to, jump out of your yard over the fence and chase cars, well, that's not a safe perspective. That perspective is going to get your dog killed. So in this particular situation, your perspective of, my word, like, you cannot jump over the fence, you cannot chase cars, that perspective is going to have more weight in that situation, because you're the one that's responsible for making those big decisions. But if it's the perspective is something like what you've described with Barrett, where it's like, it's the difference between Barrett coming to bed at exactly the moment that you want, because you want that, versus you just saying, you know what? If you want to stay out a little bit longer, like, I'm going to go to bed, you just come to bed when you're ready, buddy. Then it's like you're giving a little bit. So there's a give and a take, which is just like every healthy relationship. There's going to be conflict. I think we have to accept that too. And I think that sometimes with our dogs, we take one extreme or the other. We either just engage in like really kind of heated escalating conflict all the time, or we take the perspective of we need to tiptoe around conflict and these rough patches in our relationships. I'm not allowed to have my own perspective in the relationship, or I'm not allowed to disagree with my dog on things, versus kind of finding some sort of like a healthy kind of the gray areas in between. um so we have to we take either that side, or we take the side of, yeah, where we're just avoiding confrontation all the time. I don't want to upset my dog, but then that's not healthy for us. We become resentful, or we become afraid of our dogs, or whatever it might mean. But it really starts with, so like communication and then perspectives. And then also we do have to kind of put on that zoom out lens and just take a step back sometimes. So sometimes that might mean, depending on where things are at, sometimes zooming out and taking perspective means you physically need an actual break from your dog, especially if you've got a dog that's like really challenging. Like, it's like, can you send your dog with like a caregiver for a little bit to give them a break? Can you send them to your neighbors or to a friends, or their care options for your dog? Or can you just like put your dog in their crate and just like go out for a walk without your dog? So sometimes you have to like physically separate your dog in order to get perspective, and then maybe talk to some people about what's going on. I think that's important, too. The other times it's more just like in the moment, just being like, as you're feeling yourself getting frustrated or impatient, or you're butting heads against your dog, to just be like, okay, I'm going to just take a pause. I'm going to kind of just like let my dog sniff for a moment while I just take some breaths over here, and I just kind of get perspective. And then I kind of regroup and sort things out as well. And that's all like normal and healthy.
Well, we do that with our children, with our friends, with our spouses. We take breaks. I don't think I know anyone who could just stay 24/7 with their family, forever, without being a little irritated every once in a while. Like, we're human beings, right? So it's totally fair. Take a break, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I think we'll probably start to kind of wrap this up. So I guess if you were to summarize kind of what your sort of key take homes, I guess, are from this conversation, what would they sort of be?
Well, I guess my key words would be that, well, watching for communication breakdown, being aware of what you might be projecting in a situation, regardless if it's your dog or your husband. Understanding body language, but not like a script, have different perspectives of what might be going on in the moment. I think everything, especially like I mentioned, I focus so much on reactivity and aggression, all this weird complex stuff that at the end of the day, my brain always goes back to, what kind of relationship are we looking at here? Like, I can't help but always go back to relationship, and then I kind of peel from there and go through all my elements, because I can't help that. I think it's just because of my own experience, whether it was human or dog. My own experiences are very relationship based, perspective based, projection, who's projecting what in the moment. So yeah, I think just relationship, I think that's something we have to be hyper aware of when we're looking at our reactive dogs, or our difficult dogs, or our dogs who are struggling, is looking at our relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think for me, the big take home points from this conversation are, first and foremost, communication breakdown, and differing perspectives, or not being open to taking differing perspectives, are sort of like the it's the why for any sort of challenges that we're facing in relationships, and also at the heart of most, if not all, behavioral challenges with our dogs or in our interpersonal relationships with our friends, family, coworkers, and loved ones. And so, yeah, being mindful of context, very key. Just like we talked about with Spanish and language. So looking for not scripted, like what you said, listening, very important, taking perspectives, and also I think just sort of not, we need to relieve ourselves a little bit of the pressure to be perfect in all of this. I think that for me, having these kind of conversations, it's like kind of relieving to kind of like the script that I used to feel like I was having to follow in relationships with my own dog and in relationships with clients and their dogs, and just in conversations about training in general. It's like we put so much pressure on ourselves to be perfect and to follow these scripts, but the script is not the reality. Reality is a lot more nuanced, and it's beautiful, and it's painful, and it's great, and it's awful, and it's just like that's the beauty in the human canine bond, is the struggle, but then also like the triumph within it. And it's just, it's all of those things all at once. It's not this happy, beautiful picture where everything's always great all of the time, and we're trying to project that everything's fine. Like none of us can live like that. And I think especially when we have like reactive and complex dogs, trying to sort of be like, it's fine, it's great, we're doing great. Like, no, like sometimes we're not doing great, it's not good. That's okay. And it's like we can move forward from there too. So that's kind of my take homes from this. So
It's
yeah,
okay.
so what's that?
It's okay to not be great.
That's right. Yeah. So awesome. Well, let's wrap this up. Thank you to anybody that's watching. I hope this has been helpful. We'll make sure that there's contact information for us in sort of the comment section of this. You know, feel free to leave us a comment, ask any questions, anything like that. And